from here. Hello everyone, and welcome to this, our 7th module presentation, Respect for Law, focusing on eliminating stigma and discrimination. And with me today, and I'm Richard Reeser, General Secretary, are Sarah Kamau, Acting Chair from Kenya, United Disabled Persons Kenya, and Thandi Mafulu, Vice Chair from South Africa. So over to you, first of all, Sarah, to introduce this module.
Thank you, Richard. Welcome again, participants, to this course. We thank you for keeping strong, and I would like to start by introducing the course and say that disabled people often remain invisible in mainstream laws and policies. A contributing factor to this is stigma and discrimination, which pushes them to corners both at home and in society. Across the world, stereotypes, prejudice, and stigma contribute to the discrimination and exclusion experienced by disabled people and their families in all aspects of their lives. This results in vicious perpetuation of exclusion and lack of access to fundamental developmental services, causing greater risks of exclusion and reinforcing the cycle of poverty. The media is a powerful tool used to communicate, create, and raise awareness to reach a wider audience at a given time. Disability issues and rights can be very well communicated using the media to promote accurate images and voices of disabled people. In the past, to some extent, still today, the media has presented disabled people negatively as objects of pity, evil, or a burden, yet we can and should be portrayed as equal with different needs. Such effective portrayal across the wide range of media, press, radio, television, film, and in online platform plays an important part in breaking down stigma and prejudicial attitudes. Where disabled people and the representative disabled people's organizations are able to engage on an ongoing basis with government, progress can and has been made in enacting disability discrimination legislation. A continuing problem remains enforcement and implementation of this legislation. Where progress on legislation and its implementation is not occurring, disabled people and our disabled people organizations have had to resort to campaigning through publicity, petitioning, demonstrations, protests, and a variety of other tactics to bring about change.
That's the language.
I'll also talk about the language that Commonwealth Disabled People Forum use for the sake of conceptualization during this course. Disabled people, why we still choose to call ourselves disabled people? In the Commonwealth Disabled People Forum, we call ourselves disabled people because of the development of the social model of disability. In the 19th and the 20th century, a disabled person's medical condition was thought to be the root cause of their exclusion from society, an approach now referred to as the medical or individual model of disability. We use the social model of disability where the barriers of environment, attitude, and organization are what disable people with impairment and lead to prejudice and discrimination. So to call ourselves persons with disabilities is to accept that we are objects and we are powerless. We also view ourselves as united by a common oppression, so are proud to identify as disabled people rather than people with disabilities. When we are talking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we will use the term people or persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's have a look at what is stigma. Lack of understanding and awareness regarding the causes of disability and the resulting characteristics is a key factor in the stigma experienced by disabled people. Misconceptions about the causes of impairment often result from cultural or religious beliefs. Impairment is often blamed on the misdeeds of ancestors, parents, misdeeds of the disabled person themselves. This is still very strong in the Indian subcontinent, the idea of karma, supernatural forces such as demons, spirits, witchcraft, punishment or fate from God, very strong in many parts of Africa still. As a result, disabled people may be thought to be not quite human or a source of shame, which has a serious consequence for how they are treated. Misconceptions about the nature and abilities of disabled people, including that they are unable to contribute financially, that they are not able to have a normal relationship, that they will be unable to report sexual abuse, that their impairment is contagious, or that they bring bad luck, that their bodies have magical powers, which we've seen with when we looked earlier on at albinism and the appalling treatment of albinos in many parts of Africa, or that they are witches with magic, also contribute to the stigma, discrimination, and abuse. Now, if you think about it, those misconceptions are a direct result of the behavior and treatment of disabled people from the society as a whole. So it's really about blaming the victim of discrimination and prejudice and then saying, but you're like that because of some fantastical explanation, which has nothing to do with the realities of the oppression that are actually disabled people are facing. Discriminatory legislation and policies can reinforce prejudice and discrimination. For instance, in Kenya, I think it's still the case that a deaf or a blind person cannot run to be president because they have to be able to read in English and Swahili. So these perpetuate the stereotypes. Different types of impairments carry different levels of stigma, as does the severity of the impairment and how it was acquired. People with intellectual disabilities or severe mental health conditions, albinism, sensory impairment, are often more stigmatized than people with, say, physical disabilities, people who are just visually impaired or blind. Disabled people who can participate in their communities experience less stigma than those with more severe impairments. Again, blaming the victim. You have an inaccessible community, an unwelcoming community, and then those who can't participate are more stigmatized. Females who are disabled are doubly disadvantaged due to the stigma associated both with gender and impairment. And we will be coming on to a module in a few weeks, which will be looking, module 10, which will be looking at that in much more detail. Socioeconomic status can affect attitudes towards disability, and we saw that in the unit on livelihood, how the cycle of excluding people leads to their poverty. Disabled people in rural areas may experience more harmful practices than urban areas because rural areas often have a lower level of education and the cultural beliefs are still much stronger than in urban areas where more global views are around because of attitudes that come from the media and social media. So, cultural and religious beliefs. So much of Africa before Christian missionaries had a traditional animism, which included beliefs that impairments are punishments for bad deeds or results of witchcraft exercised by others. In fact, in many cultures, everything in the environment had to be explained by some sorts of spirits that were within them. And these ideas, which are still quite prevalent, were of course then linked to disability as well. Grafting on top of that, Christianity, and we'll see a film about this in a minute, there's a sort of fatalism of belief which revolves around half understood Christian notions which are linked with the traditional views. The idea that results of disability is an act of God. Actions of parents, mainly mothers, research indicates that beliefs about the causes of disability in, say, Cameroon, Uganda, Zambia include that is due to the sin or promiscuity of the mother. Ancestors research in Cameroon, Uganda, Zambia indicate that beliefs are about the cause of disability, including in an ancestral curse. And going back to A, the irony is with men carrying the extra chromosome, the Y chromosome, that many, more than 500 congenital conditions are passed on by the men, yet the mother is always blamed, which is typical of the sexism of many societies. Supernatural demons, spirits, research indicates that beliefs about the causes of disability in Cameroon, Uganda, and Zambia include that it is due to demonic possession and that disabled people are not really human. Witchcraft. Many Kenyans believe that an impairment results from witchcraft spells placed either upon the family or the disabled person. A variant of that is that the family has got richer because they've sold almost the soul of the child in some sort of magical exchange. God, punishment, fate. Nigeria, false beliefs about the causes of disability include that it's a curse from God. Now, it's very hard to deal with these beliefs because although you can have education and modern rationalist thought, people still go back to the cultural roots. And so it's very hard to get rid of these ideas. And we'll look in a minute at things that have actually worked. But let's look at a few more. In West Africa, for example, children were not believed to be capable of living independent lives and were expected to require constant help from non-disabled people. Disabled people cannot have normal relationships or be sexually active. A study in Bangladesh and India found that families arranged marriages for daughters with disabilities with whoever accepted them because of the low expectations they had of their daughters who were disabled. Disabled people are contagious or bring bad luck. Communities may shun disabled people and their families because they believe they will spread their ill fortune. Disabled people are unable to contribute. Stigma occurs because of the expectation that disabled people, that they are a burden. In West Africa, for example, disabled children are not only seen as a financial and resource liability internally, but also by the larger community, resulting in the shaming of the family and the disabled members. Misconceptions. Disabled people will not be able to report sexual abuse, which in turn leads to many people thinking that they can sexually abuse disabled girls with impunity. There's also a whole series of more modern myths that a cure for HIV is to have sex with a disabled girl. Misconceptions. Disabled people are witches. Disabled people, especially children with autism and people with mental health problems, are particular targets of witchcraft accusations due to their low social status, but also because of other interests in acquiring property or money. So we can see how there's a whole range of processes of stigmatization that are still operating in many cultures across the Commonwealth. Let's have a look at this film, which is a particularly bringing together.
Doris Apiadankwa from Ghana. I'm 57 years old, and I live with bipolar condition. I became sick in my early 20s, and I took medication for quite some time.
Ghana has over 2 million people with mental disabilities, out of whom over 600,000 require critical mental health care attention. There is very little care available. Ghana's 3 public psychiatric hospitals are understaffed and unhygienic. Patients are often held against their will and forced to undergo treatment. Doris Appiah spent years in and out of these hospitals.
You don't have control over anything that is done to you. When I had to have electroconvulsive therapy, I was just told that you're going for a test. And we're just taken into the rooms, put on the bed. I didn't have any idea what was going to happen to me. You go and it's done for you, and you come back to the world confused.
With so few choices for treatment, many people with mental disabilities and their families turn to prayer camps, where they rely on preachers to heal them. Some of the many religious leaders who are managing these prayer camps reported to us that they thought mental disability is a result of evil spirits.
Hello, we hear the people through me, through fasting. I used to hear the people.
In some prayer camps, people are chained, forced to fast, and made to live in unsanitary conditions for weeks, months, and even years.
The families, they just throw me here and they gone. Since over 5 years, no one comes to me. There is no one care for me. Look at where I stay. Look at where I sit. Look at where I bed. So I stand in faith of God that I hope one day it should be well for my life and I'll out from here.
Doris Appiah's parents sent her to a prayer camp when she first became ill. She spent 5 years there before escaping.
I was tied up. I was left out there. It rained. My mother was there. She couldn't say anything because they thought what they were doing was good for me.
Ghana should really be regulating all the prayer camps, but also it should establish a system within the community where people should receive quality mental health care as close as possible to where they live.
I'm part of a group made up of people who live with bipolar or mental problems. We do a lot of education, letting people know that it's possible to have mental condition and still live a normal life. We are trying to get the government to move away from institutional care into community care, where the whole community knows that this person is mentally ill, and the whole community accepts them and helps them with their medication, with their relationship. Giving them an opportunity to do something with their life will help them get better.
Doris is not alone. There are so many other people with mental disabilities who have gone ahead to succeed and live an independent life.
So that brings to mind the discussions we had on health over Article 12 and mental health. And remember, Article 12, which was behind what they were saying there, is very important for people with mental health issues. But then we saw a really good example of how modern hospitals were still run on the ideas that children and adults who had mental health issues somehow had some contagion, that something was happening to them that had to be contained, chained up, and so on. And then when they went to the prayer camps, we have this, what I talked about earlier, the combination of a more modern view and Christianity view latched onto the older ideas of animism. And this is a really toxic cocktail to affect people. So the work there that Human Rights Watch were recording that film, I think is a really salutary example to us, but it also sets an example of what can be done. So what else can be done in this situation? Let's move. Well, we need to work with families and parents. Community-based rehabilitation, particularly in India and Bangladesh, have demonstrated that, where groups of community workers go into the villages and explain to parents why their child has cerebral palsy or spinal injury or one of the other conditions, epilepsy, that they have, and that this is nothing to do with karma or spells. This is to do with the chances of getting a condition, and that their children have every right to be in the community alongside everybody else. Or contact with empowered disabled peoples with DPOs intervening, as we saw there, DPOs intervening in those situations to actually try and improve the situation. And indeed, it's about contacting the people who've been the victims of this stigma and empowering them to resist the negativity that is actually spread across the community, which disempowers people so they feel they can't do anything. Actually seeing people with various impairing conditions being included in activities in society and in the media is a crucial thing in this. Progressive government policies have helped to gradually change attitudes. The governments of Kenya and Uganda have done quite a lot on that to actually move things forward. Laws and policies have an important role to play in helping to avoid or remedy harmful cultural beliefs or practices and prevent discrimination against people with disabilities. Anti-albinism discrimination task forces set up in Tanzania and Malawi, where people who practice this are brought to courts and actually can be imprisoned or heavily fined. work with village elders and leaders to change the attitudes in the local community and educate and get them to lead the rest of their community has shown to be very effective. For instance, in Zanzibar, working with people with mental health learning difficulties there. Village gatherings that use drama, song and speeches from invited dignitaries or drama groups tailored to their particular culture, with the aim of nurturing a pride in disability in families and local communities. And I will show you a film about that in an inclusion project in Zanzibar when we get onto module on inclusive education, number 9. Schools, inclusive and accessible human rights education in schools, which addresses specific harmful beliefs about disability in that culture. And this should be part of the curriculum for all young people learning in schools. So we can see that quite a lot can be done in the community. What about the media? Well, the media, as we've said, is very influential and established societal norms. Disabled people are covered in the press, media, film, TV, advertising as well, that needs to be taken account of it. It's important to challenge stereotypes when they occur in the media. And our DPOs need to become much better at doing that, not just 1 or 2 people, but you know, setting up media watches and so on. So when we see something that is negative, it is actually challenged. Untrue perceptions generally associated with disability must be challenged. These negative and untrue perceptions are often preconditions of how people are treated, associate and respond to disabled people ourselves. Such deep-rooted beliefs, ignorance, fear, negative and untrue perceptions influence the low expectations of disabled people and their families about their abilities and limiting their skills. And this can often be the case. Modern television around the world has lots of game shows and other activities because it's cheaper than paying actors to just get members of the public to come on and bake a cake or whatever else. We need to make sure and lobby that there are disabled people taking part in all of those types of shows. If it's going to be representative of the population, at least 1 in 6 of them needs to be disabled people. Limitations on disabled people are violations of their basic human rights. However, these rights are often violated due to a lack of information. There are many cultural and literary manifestations of the stereotypes, as we've seen, which are being reinforced in myths, legend, and literature. So it's not only the basic culture of the village, but you also, the culture that has been the dominant culture across the Commonwealth, which is English literature, for instance. Most countries teach English literature. There are many stereotypes in English literature which need to be challenged. Just because it's English literature doesn't mean that it's right. So, for instance, Tiny Tim in A Christmas Carol, shown in a pathetic way. You know, the Jane Eyre, who is seen as not lovable by Rochester until he is then blind himself. These stereotypes are all pretty negative about disabled people. And it's disheartening to think that these stereotypes, beliefs, and mental attitudes and perceptions continue to be perpetuated. So the silent movies, when we got the silent movies started about in 1888, first silent one-reeler made. By the 1920s, which this little clip I'm going to show you, the cinema in Hollywood still hadn't got the talkies, but it was sending films out around the world. And this one, called The Penalty, Lon Chaney, who played more than 400 disabled villains in his career, he wasn't disabled himself, unless he had some mental health issues, but here he is as the villainous boss, intimidating these women in a hat factory. Notice his two amputated legs with stubs and crutches. we can find many of these. In fact, 1/3 of the output of the silent movie era of Hollywood by James Norden, who's an expert on this, has analyzed it. 1/3 of the output featured disability. So stories like Treasure Island were made over and over again. 7 silent movies of Treasure Island. Why? Because hooks, eye patches, wooden legs were very photogenic and told the story with few captions. So these stories were made over and over again. The Phantom of the Opera, similar one that was made a number of times. Here's a more recent stereotype, and I'm going to have to pause this as we go for the captioner because they go very quickly. So I will try and pause it as we go through to give you a chance to catch up on the captioning as we go. It's not ideal, but I think it's still worth showing.
This organization, do you know what it's called?
Its name is Spectre. It's a sensitivity training program.
James, you have a creepy prejudice against people with disabilities.
You noticed.
It would be hard not to. You're literally always killing them. Dr. No, amputee with no hands. Largo, missing an eye. Blowfield, disabled, used a wheelchair. Tiki Johnson,
Its name is...
You have a creepy prejudice against people with disabilities.
You noticed.
It would be hard not to. You're literally always killing them. Dr. No, amputee with no hands. Largo, missing an eye. Blowfield, disabled, used a wheelchair. Tiki Johnson, amputee with a claw hand. Scaramanga, a third nipple. And the list keeps going. It's insane. Stromberg. Webbed hands, jaws, growth defect and metal teeth. Trevelyan, Drax and Scarpine, facial scar. One time, you literally skewered a man's wheelchair with a helicopter rail and dropped him 20 stories into an incinerator. I get that some of this happened back in the 70s when people weren't as sensitive to this stuff, but some of this is inexcusably recent. Machine bleeding like this. Rouse. Silver, missing jaw and facial dysphoria. The whole disabled person is a supervillain thing. It's cliche and offensive. I've never seen anyone cling to outdated stereotypes so stubbornly.
Not quite so stylishly.
Don't start with the flirting. This isn't funny. You'll be given a series of targets. Try not to shoot anyone with a disability. This should be incredibly easy.
Target comes up of the wheelchair symbol and immediately James shoots.
Oh, this is worse than I thought.
So, tongue-in-cheek, of course, James Bond was an example of, in the Ian Fleming stories, it seems that his villains that he was up against nearly all had some sort of impairment. Now, the reality is that the most evil people, if there are such things in the world, like mass serial killers and so on, you wouldn't be able to pick them out from the crowd. They have no impairment. They have no reason to be like that. Yet in the cinema world, very often they come across in this way. Or another stereotype is that we're laughable. So take the film Hear No Evil, See No Evil, where there's a deaf man and a blind man, and we're meant to laugh at them. Or even worse, Dumb and Dumber, 2 people with learning difficulties, where we're meant to laugh at them. Or Life's Too Short, where Ricky Gervais has Warwick Ansel on his, not Mansell, Warwick, forgotten his name, but anyway, Warwick Davis on his shoulders, and that's all about played for fun. Or The Ringer, which is again about people with learning difficulties, making fun of them. In Nollywood, in Nigeria, we get this. Beyond Disability, again, A Cause for Mirth, or Tropic Thunder, another film which makes fun of people with learning difficulties, or a series in Britain, which may or may not have been exported around the world, called Little Britain, in which there's always a man in a wheelchair when people aren't looking who jumps out. In other words, all wheelchair users are fakers. Or Kingpin, where we get the ridiculous thing of a man with a false arm. His arm gets caught to the ball that, in the bowling ball, and it goes down the lane. So this is all for cheap laughs, but does it do disabled people much good? I would say it probably does quite a lot of harm. Or The Evil we've already looked at. There's another picture of James Bond surrounded by 3 villains, each with their impairments. Or Dustin Hoffman playing Hook in Captain Hook. Nightmare on Elm Street. We've got another one there, which is a facially disfigured person from a fire. Or Dick Tracy, where all of the baddies have some sort of impairment. And these ideas, like this Two-Face in the Batman comics, come from comic culture, United States comic culture, which has in the last 20 years turned into big business, 30 years, remakes as films. And the morality of these comics is that good looks good and bad looks bad. Far from the truth. Or you can take Mini-Me, who's evil, or The Phantom of the Opera, scary. And here's another Nollywood film, The Evil Child. So we can see these stereotypes coming all the time, thick and fast around us. Well, how are we doing in terms of presentation, of portrayal? What's been noticeable in the last 10 years or so is that many more disabled characters have been written into material coming out of Europe and America. So Homeland, Carrie is bipolar. Tony Soprano in The Sopranos has anxiety. The detective Monk has OCD. Doc Martin has hemophobia and OCD. In Glee, one of the main characters is a wheelchair user. In the French film Untouchable, we have a CEO who's spinally injured and from wanting to kill himself becomes quite good. But both characters not played by disabled people. Or Rust and Bone, where a double amputee is played by a leading French actress. Or The Bridge, where Sonia Cross has Asperger's as a detective. Or The Sessions, where which is a film of sexual exploration of someone with a severe post-polio, all played by non-disabled actors. And this one, Margarita with a Straw, which I'll show you a clip of in a minute from Bollywood and America, tells a story, a true story of a disabled woman with cerebral palsy, but is played by a Bollywood actress who's not disabled. Or My Name is Khan, again, a Bollywood film dealing with autism, where the character is not someone with autism, the actor. On the other hand, we've also seen a growth in disabled actors playing disabled parts. So Tyrone in Game of Thrones, perhaps the most popular series on the planet. Peter Dinklage is actually a person of short stature. Or Paula Sage, playing Roberta in Afterlife, is someone with Down syndrome. R.J. Mitty in Breaking Bad is actually someone who is a crutch user because of his cerebral palsy. Kitty McIver in a British soap, Emmerdale, for 4 years, was actually a blind person playing a blind person. David Proud and Lisa Hammond in the long-running series in the UK, EastEnders, both actually wheelchair users. And Liz Carr in Silent Witness is indeed not only a disabled person, but a leading advocate for disability rights. Pablo Pinedo in the film Ye También, or Me Too, is someone with Down syndrome who acts and plays someone with Down syndrome. So there's beginning to be a change in the way that the media portrays us, which is for the good. So let's have a look at a clip now, Margarita with a Straw, to see how this is actually dealt with. This is actually based on the story of her cousin, the woman who wrote this, Shonali Bose, who is the leading person in an NGO, DPO, ADAPT in Mumbai. So it's based on true life experience, this film. That was just the titles. Girl putting on makeup. Difficult script. Now in a wheelchair, moving into the bathroom. Another young man in a wheelchair. Cuddles. Woman with cerebral palsy in Mumbai. We see her first putting on her lipstick rather difficultly with a cotton bud. She smiles into the mirror. Now in a classroom in her electric wheelchair with another young man. Where are you taking me? He says. They're going to a place where they can be close together, and she cuddles and kisses and flirts with him. He responds, "You, just you," she whispers in his ear. He smiles rather embarrassedly. "Mum," she says to her mother who's grooming her, "I like this boy." She passes a note to another boy. "He doesn't love me, Mum," she says. Mother hugs her. Now, another scene, the mother passes her a letter from New York University. "You've got in to do an English degree." Now the family are dancing. She's supported by her family in dancing around. Cut to New York, where there's a demonstration. No police, F the police. She's with a blind girl with a cane called Lila. They hold hands after the demonstration. Lila feels her hand and her face. Now they're undressing together and have a relationship. A gorgeous coming of age film. They're kissing. Now she gets her up in a club and dances, but she collapses. A subject rarely seen in films. This is all from the trailer. "This is my privacy," she says to her mum. "You want privacy from me?" says her mother. Her mother has been told she has cancer. She goes into a bar in New York and asks for margarita with a straw. A happy moment in front of the computer back at home. Margarita with a straw. Best film at London Film Festival. The teacher says, "Do you want help?" She says, "Actually, I can type." And then he puts his hand on a young man and she says, "Yes, that would be wonderful." A film by Shonali Bose. So, Margarita with a Straw. What's interesting about this film is although the main character was a well-known Bollywood actress, several of the supporting characters are actually played by disabled people, including the blind girl and the original boy that she looks to. So that's interesting progress. Another film which I think is Yo También, which I mentioned, features Pablo Pineda. Now, Pablo is very interesting. He is a young man with Down syndrome. He's now in his 40s, but his mother insisted that he went to mainstream school, and he actually has a master's degree in teaching. And this is semi-biographical. He's working not as in an NGO which gives support to people with learning difficulties, and he fancies this blonde woman who he's on the beach with now. He's, after many attempts, he's got her to take him out for the day, and they're having a discussion, and I will read the discussion.
¿Por qué eres así?
Stop it, cut the sound down so I can read it, because most of the people on this won't be able to speak Spanish anyway. Why? Why are you smarter? In my case, it's because my mother talked to me a lot. Since I was little, we talked about history, about politics. She asked me lots of questions, and I answered her. And as my mother saw that I could understand what she was saying, she decided I should go to school. If you knew the fuss she kicked up that I could go to school, my God, says the Pablo character. I thought you had said that. Not at all. I am Down syndrome from head to toe, not just some small version of it. I mean, the whole way. And they often say that there are two ages, the chronological and the mental, but that's not true. I am 34 years old, and I've been tying my shoelaces since I was 10. That's because earlier she'd offered to tie his shoelace. She looks back embarrassed and lies back on the beach in her bikini. He chuckles. You've got such a nerve, she said. You've got such a nerve. The film goes on, and she doesn't really like him, but in the end, perhaps out of sympathy, she does have sex with him once, which he finds amazing. But the film ends with him going off independently, having confidence, and you can tell that in the future, he's going to build his own relationships based on love and trust. So that is a very progressive film that goes a long way. In dealing with the media, we need to adopt this sort of code of practice when we're talking to screenwriters, actors, producers, directors, journalists, news presenters, and so on. Shun one-dimensional characterizations. Portray disabled people as having complex personalities. Avoid depicting us as always receiving. Avoid presenting physical and mental characteristics as determine our personality. Avoid depicting us as objects of curiosity. Make us ordinary people with the whole variety that human beings have. Our impairment should not be ridiculed or made the butt of jokes. Avoid sensationalizing us, especially as victims or perpetrators of violence. Refrain from endowing us with superhuman attributes. Avoid making our attitude the problem. Show the barriers we face that keep us from living useful lives. Avoid showing disabled people as non-sexual. Show us in loving relationships and expressing the same range of sexual needs and desires as non-disabled people. Show us as ordinary parts of life in all forms of representation. And most importantly, show us, portray us, cast us, and train us, and write us into your scripts, programs, and publications, and employ us in the media. The media has millions of jobs, and disabled people need to be working in those jobs to make a difference around the world and across the Commonwealth. So what can we do? DPOs can provide training on stereotypes and imagery. We can set up a media watch to monitor portrayal. DPOs have to organize with media companies, media professionals, presenters, actors, directors, editors, script writers, producers, advertisers, and government departments to not only challenge negative portrayal and explain why these both offensive and disempowering to disabled people, but also challenge the absence. A few years ago, as part of the British disability movement, we managed to get government advertising, and they advertised for lots of jobs, and benefits and so on, to feature at least 40% disabled people. And these weren't just about advertising for disability benefits. They were advertising for all sorts of things to feature disabled people as part of the general life of the community. That can make a huge difference. And governments can't really say no if they've signed the convention, because Article 8 on awareness raising says they have to do such things. Work with journalists to report stories, to not sensationalize stories on disability. In the course book, you will find some guidance for journalists, and we'll come back to that when we have the seminar. Discrimination then. Discrimination will only end with the existence of both a strong anti-discrimination policy based on the social model of disability and a well-funded disabled people's movement to enforce it. The weakness, here we are now, 13 years or more after disability legislation came in around the world, and it just isn't being implemented. And the gap is the lack of a well-funded and well-trained disability movement that understands things from a disability rights point of view, from the social model, as we are featuring in this course. In many countries, we have the legislation, the governments lack the political will to enforce the implementation. In other countries, the legislation is outmoded or not in line with the UNCRPD. In both cases, we need a renewed and reinvigorated disabled people's movement to do this. Need strong monitoring mechanisms, a means of legal redress easily and freely accessible and available, awareness raising led by disabled people, and disability equality training for all in authority of what the UNCRPD really means. And what's the difference between awareness raising and equality training? Well, the difference is anybody can do raising awareness. Don't do that. Don't show disabled people in that sort of way. Disability equality training, on the other hand, is training that professionals have to go into, which is led and developed by disabled people who've learned to be trainers, where they use their experience of the oppression of disability to deeply challenge the attitudes and practices of those who are in authority. And I've seen this most successfully done with people with learning difficulties going in and running a lecture for trainee doctors at Bart's Hospital, where they take control of what is going on that curriculum on that day. And these are doctors who are steeped in the medical model, who spend 3 years dissecting bodies and somehow think that that gives them a knowledge of how to practice medicine with the range of people who will present in their clinics and in their surgeries. And that antidote of the disabled people, particularly those who they would see as least able to tell them anything, telling them they've got it wrong, is really powerful. We need to develop that capacity wherever we are in all DPOs around the world. Now over to Tandy to take us through a few examples of people standing up for and to try and change and challenge discrimination. So Tandy, if you could come in on George Daniel, who I knew and was indeed the vice chair of the first incarnation of the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum. You with us, Tandy?
Thank you so much, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. It's afternoon in South Africa, but let me say just good day to all. Like Richard said, my name is Tandy Mpulo. We are going to talk about the 116 days protest that was done by George Daniel, the chairperson of the movement in Trinidad and Tobago in the year 2003. The protest started soon after the state-owned National Flour Mills refused to hire Devon Garraway and Anthony Daz in their first week of May. It ended when Prime Minister Patrick Manning promised employment at the facility for the two men, who are the members of the Trinidad and Tobago branch of Disabled Persons International, along with other significant concessions. During the fifth week demonstration, protesters gathered under a tent outside National Flour Mills, educated reporters, government officials, and the public about their issues. According to George Daniel, president of the local DPI chapter, Mr. Manning agreed to several conditions in addition to hiring Garaway and Diet. Daniel said that Manning promised that a disability act similar to the 1990 Americans with Disability Act would be put in place to protect the rights of people with disability, which is a good start as Manning commitment that all schools, including old buildings, would be made accessible for persons with disability. This all led to the legislation eventually.
Thank you.
Now,
all right, now we're going to, I'm going to just show you a film about another struggle in 1995. Starting in 1992, there had been 16 attempts to bring disability discrimination through the UK Parliament. And at each attempt, the government of the day had spoken it out, filibustered, asked endless questions, as it wasn't agendaed by government, but by private members' bills. The government did all they could to stop it going through. In 1995, disabled people in desperation broke out and started demonstrating on the streets in order to force the issue. And here's a short little film about what they did.
Other people are inconvenienced.
I'm inconvenienced every day of my
because
unless you fight for your rights, you lose them. You've got to keep going.
I want to be able to go nightclubbing, I want to go to restaurants, I want to go to the cinema without being a virus.
Being arrested, changed to buses.
Changing ourselves to buses was something we just simply had to do. There'd be somebody at the front of the bus, there'd be somebody at the back and somebody underneath.
What have you done to the bus? I've just chained myself to it with a handcuff.
You're not going to any simple doing this.
Listen, we're not interested in your sympathy. All we want is to be able to get on the bus the same as every other member of the public.
You want to get on the bus, get on the bus.
How?
This is stupid, I want in front.
How? I'm getting that. Oh, dragging me up the stairs. He's got another thing coming.
It was important to go to the heart of government. It always is. In the end, we were saying that we want a law that protects our rights. We had nothing.
Hi, guys.
Now there's four of the activists.
That was iconic then and it's still iconic now. I just thought it was like a really significant moment.
I was amazed. I do remember it just made me, it was making me well up with absolute pride.
First time disabled people had rights.
It meant that we got attention to the issue. If other ways had worked, we wouldn't have needed to do that. You know, if people had just kind of, you know, had some common sense and included it in society, we wouldn't have had to do any of this stuff.
I'm getting unapologetically emotional now. We absolutely need disabled people to be free, and that is why we need it to keep going.
Arrested?
I got arrested 8 times. What about
I
you?
lost count. 25 years on, I think disabled people are in a better situation in some circumstances than we were. If you look at the design of that bus now, there is no point at which to handcuff yourself. But disabled people's rights aren't fully protected.
by being handcuffed to a train, other people were delayed, other people were inconvenienced.
I'm inconvenienced every day of my
because
life. We achieved something significant, but it hasn't gone far enough. So we're still fighting for better legislation.
It did lead to the Disability Discrimination Act, which was quite weak legislation, but later the Amendment Acts were passed in 2001, bringing all education under it, and 2005, all public sector. and then those were incorporated into the 2010 Equalities Act. And we lost some things with that. So it's internal vigilance really is what it's about. Now I'm going to bring Tandy in again to talk about the struggles in South Africa, similar struggles to bring things about. So Tandy. Yeah.
Richard, we're at 53 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 7 minutes to go, I think. So we will carry on. Tandy.
Thank you again, Richard. In South Africa, we've got what they call the Rainbow Nation and strong constitutional commitments in the post-apartheid era to equality and inclusion for all. Much legislations were passed. The positive policy environment in South Africa presents unique opportunities for disabled people to address issues such as poverty, high level of unemployment, education of disabled children and young, access to social security and assistive devices, access to housing, public health services, and transport. But the current legislation in the form of Employment Equity Act, Social Assistance Act, Skills Development Act, Skills Development Levy Act, and others have helped create a new sense of awareness of the needs of people with disability. However, with the exception of few policies such as the Social Assistance Act, the implementation of these policies has made marginal impact on the lives of majority of these people in South Africa. We've got these beautiful policies, legislations, but the problem of implementation continues, and we're not held by moving responsibility for disability from the President's office to the Department of Social Security in 2014. This again, the point with inclusive education, where currently 600,000 disabled children are out of schools, despite laws that are there, such as the 1996 Education Act, which guarantees education for all disabled people, including now that we've got COVID-19, it's even worse. Children now they're expected to use, media to study, which for most of disabled children, they don't have access to that. Secondly, they cannot use them. So it becomes even worse. So we've got this beautiful, even our constitution good, the implementation is the problem. So as disabled people in South Africa, it's so seriously that we are challenging the government to say they need to change how they do things. And I will agree with the Britain people that they must, we must just follow what they've done. The government will listen. And we are still fighting for our rights.
And we've got a little news clip on that, which you can comment on at the end, so which we'll play now.
Yes.
It's very difficult. South Africa has key legislation that caters for people with disabilities. But the reality is that these laws have not made life any easier for the disabled community.
The simplest, most important example that I can give to you, you go to a mall, a parking bay that is reserved for people with disabilities. Maybe you have been one of the violators of that. Always, there is somebody who is in a hurry to drop off this box or to drop off something in this office and is going to use that parking and come back. When you come as a person with a disability wanting to use that parking, you can't use it.
Disabled People of South Africa is an organization run by the disabled to fight for the rights of the disabled. They deal firsthand in an unaccommodating society. They feel theirs is not a social problem, but one of human rights.
Every day, most of our problems are based on the violation of human rights. The right to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of, even the right, the most important freedom, access to information is very limited for people with disabilities. Then you can find yourself, you can ask yourself a question, Uti, as disabled people, when we are looked at as social problems, then when are we going to be respected?
Many people and businesses are ignoring the laws, which makes life for the disabled all the more difficult. especially for those in wheelchairs.
You look at the transportation system. We have, you know very well, Emma Taxi, they don't even care to stop for a person on a wheelchair, you know. Buildings, offices, we want to go to the office, a certain office, you'll find there are stairs there. There are no ramps for you to be able to go in. You have to beg and ask somebody to come and open a special door for you to be able to come inside the building. You know, we constantly live under that dependency mentality, because why? The surrounding that we live in pushes us to be in that format.
By law, 2% of the staff of companies and government must be disabled people, yet less than 1% of people with disabilities are employed.
We are human, we are living, we've got needs just as anybody else. I aspire to have my own house, I aspire to have my own car and drive my own car. And how do I get those? I need to get employed. And I think I can make a meaningful contribution in the South African economy by getting employed, not deplete the state coffers by receiving disability grants for the rest of my life.
In the last 22 years of democracy, government has made strides in passing new laws to help the disabled.
Our government has done a lot legislatively towards normalizing the playing field for persons with disabilities. We've got an Employment Equity Act, we've got the Reasonable Accommodation Act, you know, we've got a number of legislative pieces that are in place that speaks towards, you know, making a disabled person's life easier. A lot of them. Now, the problem is at the implementation level, and why we don't have an implementation system that is quite visible is because nobody is playing the monitoring and the evaluation role.
Previously, disability fell under the presidency's mandate. In 2014, it was moved to the Department of Social Development, a move that has angered disabled.
Stop it there and let you, Tandy, say a little bit more about this.
Very difficult. South Africa has key legislation.
Tandy,
yes, thank you, Richard.
Say a little bit more.
All that has been happening on the video, that is the truth. That is our chairperson for the Gauteng province, Mr. Denkekal. That is exactly what is happening in South Africa. And all 9 provinces were having a march for that day for making sure that the presidency is listening to us. Now, the disability, it has gone back to the presidency. But it's one and the same thing. Nothing is happening. You don't see anything. So actually, nothing has changed. It's 25 years now in democracy, but we are still striving to make sure, you know, when it comes to women, it's even worse. It's even worse to women. When it comes to sexual rights, you know, in South Africa, you've got a mental disability, you become pregnant. The family member will just say, no, abort. And you are being aborted without your permission because you cannot look after the child. But you are able to look after their own children, but they cannot trust you to look after your child, your own child.
Thank you.
So there's a lot that is happening.
Okay, I have to stop you there as we're running out of time.
No, thank
and
you.
we've come to Sarah to conclude this session, please. Thank you, Tandy.
Thank you so much.
Sarah?
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
I want to conclude this session by giving a few concluding thoughts about what we should do so that we can ensure this stigmatization and inclusion is achieved. All decision-making positions in private and public organizations need to receive disability equality training delivered by disabled equality trainers, and then develop plans to remove barriers in their organizations and promote disability equality. However, as we have seen, the most effective way of bringing about change and to challenge stigma and discrimination against disabled people is the self-organization and self-advocacy by disabled people and their organizations, their DPOs. Passing anti-discriminatory laws in line with UNCRPD is only the first stage on the road to disability equality. These need codes and directives for their implementation across all areas of society. Awareness needs to be raised, and disabled people and their families need to know their rights and how to enforce them. It should not be left to disabled people to do this by themselves. If laws are passed, then governments, civil service, and human rights institutes need to monitor what is going on, and there is need to be sufficient funding. There is need for sufficient funding to do this. There must be a legal right to challenge disability discrimination, and judgment must be thoroughly enforced by the state and judiciary. Only in this way can we hope to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals with nobody left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we will end it there as we are at our time limit, but thank you very much to everyone who contributed to this.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Goodbye.